So I'm Ricky Barber from the Crypt Studio. So yeah, my parents were both music teachers. So I guess as growing up, they were also singing in various choirs. So we were surrounded by music all the time, really, me and my brother. I had an elder brother, or do still have an older brother, Peter. And he was really into his music as well. But certainly my parents, we were always, musicians would come into the house all the time. My dad did piano teaching at home when he came home from school in the evenings, so that was just a constant. And both myself and my brother were in the local choir while we were young. So I guess music was sort of it was everything really. We didn't really do much sport, and outside of, school and things like that, it was a lot of music. And I remember my brother, I think he got given for Christmas a snare drum, probably when he was about 13, 14. And I got given a bass guitar, and I didn't even know what a bass guitar was. I don't think I'd ever clocked what a bass guitar. I just thought guitars were guitars, so I didn't know what it was, And so I had to sort of go through this process of understanding what a bass guitar was, and was that going to be me? Was I going to be a bass guitarist? And I did. I sort of fell for it. I thought the bass was my thing, so I learned, picked up. I think did I have a lesson? I must have had a lesson with Part of the Present, with a guy who lived about 5 doors down. He was a guitar, I think he was a guitar player, but he could show me the rudiments of what a bass job was or whatever. So yeah, I learned a couple of songs with him, I suppose, and then just taught myself to play bass guitar. So that was quite young, I had that. And I suppose then at school, I did music for GCSE, so I ended up hanging out with all the music guys at the school, and we started a band, obviously. Used to do Cure covers and Bauhaus and quite sort of goth sort of stuff, I think, in the early 80s or mid 80s. So I would learn Simon Gallup's Cure bass lines, which were always really good. And yeah, just sort of started my sort of journey of playing, I guess, as a bass player. As that evolved, I then realised it was really hard to write songs on a bass. So I taught myself to play guitar so I could learn chords and then actually sort of start writing songs and things. And that was my sort of, childhood, I guess, up until I was about 17, when I left the UK and went travelling for a couple of years. So I sort of I was out of the country for 2 years, ended up buying a guitar while I was travelling because I missed having something with me, and then travelled around with a guitar, mainly in the States and Australia and New Zealand and places like that. And the more I sort of had that, I realised that actually I probably needed to do something with music, because it felt wrong when I didn't have something around me, if you like, to play either a piano or something. So when I was coming back from my travels, I sort of decided that was it. I was going to go and work in the music business somehow, preferably join a band and do that. So when I got back, this is about 93, back from my travels, I think I joined a band locally quite quickly, called Vina Carver, and we used to play in High Wycombe, Reading, places like that. And eventually then, at the same time, I auditioned for a band in London, from an ad in the back of Melody Maker, and traded cassettes with this guy called David Prangley Ryder, who sounded incredibly exotic. And he had a band called Rachel Stamp that he was starting in London, and I think I was the first one to join him. And I couldn't tell if he was a guy or a girl at the time from his singing either, and even when I met him it was kind of like confusing, but really exciting. And then we had a guy called Will Crewston who joined us on guitar, and we made a band, Rachel Stamp, yeah. And I played in that for a little bit, which was really exciting. I used to have to work in High Wycombe. I was doing 12-hour night shifts in a data warehouse, like really early computer data warehouse, which I guess the data in this warehouse, which was the size of at least one football pitch, maybe more, underground, I think you probably fit that data on your phone now. Do you know what I mean? It was ridiculous, these massive machines that I used to have to fill up with data cartridges that were all on tape. I would do that in the night time, go home and sleep a little bit, and then drive up to London and rehearse with the band, and then go and do it all over again, rinse and repeat. And at that time, I think I was just doing every job, any job I could find. So I worked on building sites, I worked in pubs, I worked in warehouses, I worked, decorating, did any job I could do really to fund the music stuff. And yeah, that's probably the start of my journey into music, really, into the business. My first bass that I got for Christmas from my parents was a K bass, a Japanese bass. It was Sunburst, and I think it was a mid-size, it wasn't full-size bass, because I was only 11, I think. I'm guessing 11 or 12 when I got that. I can't remember the amp. I seem to remember it was brown, small brown practice sort of amp. No, can't remember the name of it, but I had that for a while, and then I remember, must have been when I joined then a band at secondary school, then at Desborough and Maidenhead. I think we went up to Percy Pryor's Music in High Wycombe, which was a music shop. It's no longer there, and I bought an Aria Pro 2 bass guitar, which was full size and black, and I really liked that bass. That was great. No idea where, I must have sold it somewhere along the line, but don't have it anymore, sadly. Yes, the band Rachel Stamp, it's still going now. I mean, it was a bit of a kind of cult band in London. Probably arrived at the wrong time. It was quite glam, quite rock, just when Britpop was hitting. So it wasn't grunge and it wasn't Britpop. It was early 90s, and it was kind of the wrong band in the wrong era kind of thing. But they were great, and they had a bit of a name, certainly a following in London. They would sell out those shows all the time. And the other guys that played in the band, Will, the guitarist, is still playing now. He goes out as a solo act called Scant Regard, but he also plays in Adam and the Ants touring band. He plays with the Selector when they tour, and lots of sessions. The keyboard player Mike Rowe went on to play with Oasis, and then toured with Sheryl Crow for years, and now he's still playing with Noel Gallagher, I believe. Mike Rowe, so he did really well out of it. And David, the singer, is still doing various projects. He came and recorded recently at my studio, so we're still in touch. So it was a great conduit, that band, for everybody to go off and do different things, even if that band itself didn't get great success. They did get signed to Warner's, but yeah, I'm not sure it ever particularly went where everyone wanted it to go. But that's the way of the business, right? From that point, I remember doing a gig with Rachel Stamp at a club called Heaven, where Dave Stewart came to see us play, because I think they were thinking of signing us. Dave Stewart had a publishing company, and one of his bands, I think we were supporting, they were called the Freaks of Desire. I think we supported them at Heaven, and we had a guy play keyboards with us called Thysandra Paul, if I remember, who was playing a keytar. He was quite a character in a boiler suit. I'd never met him before, but he played on stage with us for some reason. And he was playing with Julian Cope at the time. It was a very odd night, that. Anyway, that was kind of the end. That was the end of my time in Rachel Stamp, because meanwhile, what had been happening with the band I was playing with in Wycombe, Vina Carver, the singer of that band, Lindy, had auditioned for a band in London herself, with a lady called Toni Halliday, who was in a band called Curve, and they'd had a lot of success as indie band. They toured, I know, with Depeche Mode and stuff. So they were quite a big deal. And Lindy had got the gig playing guitar for her, and they were looking for a bass player. So Lindy contacted me and said, "Do you want to come and audition for this new thing we're doing with Toni Halliday?" Great. So I went and did that and got offered the gig. So left Rachel Stamp, went over to this other band which became a band called Scylla, Scylla, like the Greek goddess, is it? Or are they goddess? Anyway, a Greek thing. And we auditioned a drummer called Julian Bound, great drummer, and another guitarist, Fiona Linsky. And we started to record as a band called Scylla. Around that time, I remember buying a Rickenbacker, 4001 Rickenbacker, which I'd found online somewhere. I managed to find this, and it was beautiful. It was a classic. It was 1973, so same age as me. And I just desired that bass so much, and I managed to pick it up really cheap. I can't remember what I paid, 350 quid or something for it at the time, which was a lot of money for me, but I knew it was a bit of a steal of someone out in Reading somewhere. So that became my sort of main bass at the time. And I bought an Ampeg rig then, because I thought I'm actually playing in proper bands now, I better get a decent setup. So I bought an SVT2 amp and a 15-inch cab, I think it was. Yeah, still got it actually upstairs. And that became my sort of main rig when I was playing. As it happened, when we went on tour, we then hired in an 8x10, one of those massive stack speakers, which once you put it in a flight case, they call it the Widowmaker, I think. It's an utter horror to carry in and out of venues. So heavy. I played that, and I think because the bass player in Curve, this guy called Dean, he was playing Music Man basses. And I think Toni had one of his, so she wanted more bottom end from me, and the Rickenbacker is not blessed with the most the bigged bottom end, if you like. So I started playing a Music Man bass then, and eventually bought my own one. So I would have the Ricky and then a Music Man, so it gave me two different sort of sounds. And Scylla did okay, you know, we did all right. We toured a bit, we started to record, and we toured with the Long Pigs British tour with them, played lots of gigs with, I'm trying to remember all the bands now, Stereo Lab, 60 Foot Dolls, Feeder, Yola Tengo, can't remember, lots of sort of bands. And the idea, obviously, to try and get a record deal. And during that time, Toni Halliday had her husband's a guy called Alan Moulder, who's an amazing engineer, producer, mixer. And we were just blessed that we could have him to make our demos, and I could learn off him how to become a better recording player, because I'd only ever played in bands and live and rehearsed and done that. Now we're actually getting the microscope, and you know, the spotlight's on you as a player then in the studio, and that's a different learning curve. So to be sort of educated through that with Alan Moulder, who produced Depeche Mode and went on to do Smashing Pumpkins, Nine Inch Nails, loads, like everybody. It was a real eye-opener and a treat to work with him, really. And we got to do some stuff. We got to speak to Flood, and a few others. And I think because Toni Halliday, I remember, was signed again to Dave Stewart from Eurythmics. He had a publishing company called Anxious Music. And he was based at the Church Studios in Crouch End. And that's where his publishing company was. So we would get to come and record our demos really in the Church Studios, which was, for me, it was just an amazing space. I'd never been in a big studio like that. And that was my introduction to proper recording, really, was there with Alan. And then we worked with Adrian Bushby, Chris Sheldon, various other engineers doing our recordings, did some stuff at Battery Studios, Fortress 2, I think, which was in Kentish Town at the time. yeah, had a great education in recording then, which was also a sort of passion of mine. I loved the recording side of things, and also thought that I'd probably, if the music side of it didn't work out, I might like to go into that world, and actually, because I just loved sounds and stuff like that. Yeah, and that was sort of my introduction to the studio world and recording properly, not just me on a 4-track at home in my bedroom. So I had a really good time learning and touring and stuff with Scylla, but ultimately that band didn't get signed. We did a lot of showcases. I think it was quite complicated having a pretty well-known frontwoman who'd had a successful project before, and I think labels were a bit reluctant to go with the new thing she had. They all kind of wanted to go back to the old thing she did. So it was a bit of a tricky scenario. So ultimately Toni disbanded the band. That sort of stopped at that point, and the four of us, the rest of the band, Lindy, Fiona, Julian and I, decided we either stopped there or we gave it a go ourselves. And having had Lindy as a front woman before in our previous band Vina Cavo in Wickham, I knew she was great at the front. So we decided to give it a go. Changed our name to Antacid, and the four of us carried on basically. We managed to get signed to Anxious because of our connections, I suppose, with Dave Stewart's and publishing and the studio, the Church in Crouch End. So yeah, we were quite excited, and that was the plan was to try and push ahead with Antacid. And I guess by now I was about 24, 25, starting to realise that it's not that easy getting success in the music business, even though I was really happy with what I was doing, and I got further than maybe I ever thought I ever would, you know, I guess at that point. But I could see it's quite difficult to get to that next bit. And I thought then that I probably need to have some other plan, some other career thought at least, because I hadn't gone to university or anything. I thought, well, I need to have something up my sleeve, otherwise, you know, I'm going to be back in the warehouse or on the building site or whatever. And all the way along, all this time, I'd been doing any job I could do. So I'd started to work in merchandising. So I was touring with bands. When I wasn't on tour myself, I was then touring and selling T-shirts for bands. And I toured with the Rolling Stones around Europe, which was pretty cool, on their Bridges to Babylon tour. I did tours with Finley Quay. I did Boyzone. I did so many different bands that I would tour with, which was, you know, a great adventure. But again, I thought I don't want to do this for a career. This is probably not what I want to be doing, you know, later in life, sort of thing. And alongside that, I just sort of managed to. I think my brother had started working filming, or working for a company that did some filming, and having some interest in that, I thought, well, I'll go and see if I can help out on shoots. So I did that. I started to help out on some corporate films, and all the time they didn't seem to have a sound person with them, or the cameraman was doing the sound or something. And nobody seemed to understand it. And I thought, well, I understand sound. That's all I've ever done really, is sound. You know, recording at home on my 4-track and now in studios. I mean, it's the same process, it's just not music. So I sort of camera assisted for a while and always offered to do the sound bit if I could. And then realised actually that's probably something I could do. It made sense, and you know, and I liked the creativity of being on shoots, and you got treated well, you got fed. If you went to film away somewhere, they gave you a hotel room that you didn't have to share with someone, which I always had to do when I was touring with bands. I thought, hey, this seems all right. Maybe this is a decent backup career. So that's when that whole part of my life sort of started, really. And I did lots of short films at the weekends just to learn, because I didn't have anyone to learn off. I hadn't gone to a college, or now if I did it again, God, that was not the way to do it really, but it's the only way I knew. So I just learned on the job, and eventually started to get some work. I started applying for, you know, positions. You start to meet cameramen. They like either like you or don't, but hopefully they like you, and then they say, oh, are you free next week? I've got another shoot, and you go and do that, and you might meet someone else on that shoot, and you start building your network up. And I started to grow that a little bit, still hiring in equipment when I needed it. I didn't own anything, I just hired it, or the company had their own kit and I would go and use that. But eventually I got to the point where I thought, actually, I can probably do this. So then I invested in my own equipment and took it a bit more seriously, and I stopped doing all the other jobs then. I didn't do any more touring and pubs or building sites. So I just concentrated on audio. And that sort of coincided around the same time that Antacid was doing demos. We were still at the church studios where Anxious Publishing was set. They had a demo studio at the other end of the church called the Crypt, and it was available for the bands to use. So there was the Freaks Desire. God, I'm not going to remember all of them now. There was a few bands anyway who were signed to Anxious that were trying to make it, and we all could just book time in the Crypt. And I'd sort of got friendly with a couple of assistant engineers at the church, Graham Dominy and Matt Syme, and a few others, and they would come and record our stuff sort of when they weren't busy in the main studio. And I particularly got on well with a guy called Matt Syme. He was a great young engineer, and we just bonded really well, and we started to write together because he couldn't play any instruments, so he knew how to program. So me and him started to write together, and I'd do the guitars and basses and whatever, the melody sort of stuff, and he'd do beats and sounds, and we started to make music together. I think it was around that time that Antacid ceased to be for various reasons. I think one of the girls decided she wasn't going to do it anymore, and another one was moving to Wales or something, so the band just sort of fell apart, and I was left thinking, oh right, okay, what am I doing now? So started writing with Matt, and we were doing sort of more sort of, I don't know what you call it, sort of hip-hop based things, I guess. Not that we had a rapper, not that either of us were rappers, but it was all beat based, and we were quite into Tribe Called Quest and all that sort of scene. And around that time, Anxious Music, Dave Stewart's publishing company, unbeknownst to us, just suddenly said they were bankrupt. They didn't have any more money, and they stopped, which was a big shock. So Matt and I happened to be recording at the time. We knew the accountant, a guy called Andrew, who was just around the corner. So him and I said, look, should we try and pay next month's rent so we can do some stuff here? I was like, yeah, go on then. So we went round the corner, went to the accountant and just asked him, look, can we pay next month's rent if you're thinking of, not doing it? Of course, being an accountant with a bankrupt company, he was like, yeah. So we just wrote a check out. I think we were paying £300 a month or something for it then. So we committed, and we started running the Crypt, and I'm still here 30 years later. So it's it was just one of those chance moments, because I think a week after, there were producers like Gil Norton were inquiring about the studio and trying to get hold of the Crypt, and I was sort of like, well, it's ours now, we got it. So we never left, and yeah, now I'm like I say, nearly 30 years later, I'm running the Crypt Studio and have done ever since. So yeah, I took the Crypt Studio over in about 1999, working with Matt Syme, and it was our sort of playground for a while. We weren't looking to commercialise it specifically at the time. It wasn't even really set up particularly well. I think we were working on ADAM tape, which was a really early digital tape, and we had a 16-track half-inch tape as well, I think. So we were sort of connecting up just before proper Pro Tools or any of that stuff had come in fully. It was very early days anyway. So we were working on that. I don't think we had access to the live room either. I think that was just full of Dave Stewart's junk at the time. So it was only when he finally left and they cleared that stuff out, probably a few years later, that we actually had the whole studio. So it was mainly a control room and a little booth we had at the start. But eventually we did try to start monetising it, and Matt started recording bands like Feeder. We did quite a lot of Feeder's early stuff in there. Some of their big hits were done in the Crypt. One whole album was done there. Some other bits. Various sort of bands started to come through. And then Matt, I can't remember when this was now, probably a good 10, 15 years ago, sort of decided he was going to leave the business. He had a kid or something and wanted to change. So I ended up running it myself then. And it was tricky because I wasn't an engineer as such. I could do it, but that wasn't my career. My career was a music and a location sound recordist by then. I was working on TV shows and doing, BBC things and Sky and whatever, just filming when I wasn't at the studio. So I had to be quite clever with the place and just be quite flexible. So, it was a rehearsal room for a while. It became a place that people filmed quite a lot. We started our own series here called the Crypt Sessions, where we filmed lots of bands, which I ran for, a long time. Never made me any money, but it was fun to do. And we filmed, we were catching early talent like Michael Kiwanuka, got him very early, Lucy Rose. Lots of bands who were just coming through. We'd get them and film them and give them a platform. Sort of over the years, it's partly through necessity of running a studio, which life is like this all the time. You're busy sometimes you're not, and the industry changes, obviously. I've been through a lot of changes from, when I first started, we were still in vinyl and CD world, and now that's sort of very secondary, isn't it, to digital streaming and stuff. So that's just necessitated us going into different areas. So now the Crypt Studio itself is a place where we use as a venue sometimes. It's a dry hired, so it's a commercial space now. So we hire it out to people. But on top of that, I've got where we are now in the same building, which is there are 2 studios down here that are more production rooms, but also we do a lot of post-production for the filming world that I've sort of dragged together now with the studio world. So we do a lot of voiceover, a lot of sound design, mixing, dubbing, ADR, all of that kind of film stuff comes and gets done in here. And we also have a music library, which is a production music library, which we make albums, work with about 50 composers, sub-published across the world through BMG. So there's lots of different revenue streams coming in, and hopefully they all balance out and you can survive and keep your studio running and keep making music. So the studio website is thecryptstudio.com, and then the rest of the stuff we do is on bleachproductions.com.